Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. I totally forgot that I sent you my bio, but that's kind of the basics of who I am. But I'll kind of go through a little bit more here for you. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to share my screen with you again. Okay. So I don't want to take up too much time talking about myself because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to do the actual edits. Can you guys see my screen? Yes,
Yes.
yes, heads. Okay, so as I mentioned, I am in Colorado Springs, and I actually moved here about 3 years ago from California. And I am a mom of 3. These are my 3 babies. The youngest is actually 1 now, and when I was up on stage for my Gia, this little baby here, Lila, my little girl, she was actually in my belly. So and she went with me to imaging this last year, so she's been almost as many times as me. Okay, so there's those little kiddos. Okay, so after I went to art school, I took a break from art for a while because I was just so drained from art school. It was about 3 years, basically nonstop. I had projects every week. I had 5 classes every week, and each class demanded a project. So by the time I got done with art school, I was exhausted from photography, and I basically set down my camera and found other ways to make money, which one of them was actually fighting fires. So I was a wildland firefighter in Nevada for 1 summer. That's kind of what people do after high school or during the summers from college. They come home, make some money, and then go back to school. So after I got done fighting fires, I became a makeup artist. So this is actually me doing body painting for a fashion show in San Francisco. And I did that for about 6 years or so until I went to on a trip to Romania. And while I was in Romania and Europe, it actually re-sparked my love for photography. And so that's how I kind of got back into it, and that's why I'm here today. So, okay, so everything I'm doing today, I will be editing on my Cintiq. I have the Cintiq, and so what the Cintiq does is it actually projects my screen onto my tablet screen. So it is a little bit overkill, but I travel a lot and I do teach to bigger groups. And because my laptop is a little bit of a smaller screen, I found that this kind of helps me to have a little bit more area to look at and to work with when I'm on location. If you don't have a tablet, but you're thinking about getting one, I would highly recommend the Intuos Pro, which is this guy that we are raffling off at the end of the night. So again, everything I do is done on a tablet. So anyways, let's go ahead and we're just gonna kind of dive in here. So where do I even start? So I shoot in my basement. My studio is in my basement, and I just shoot with alien bees. And I just shot this picture, gosh, I don't know, maybe like last summer. I tend to shoot a little bit on the darker side because I like to bring back highlights in a little bit more of a controlled manner within Photoshop. So that's kind of where I start with that. So when I start with a picture, let's go ahead and duplicate our layer. And if I'm going too fast by any means, feel free to stop me. I can back up and I can go back and show you guys kind of what I do. Just getting started, I do tend to talk a little bit fast. So, okay, so I duplicated my layer, and so we're just gonna do some really basic cleanup. So one of my favorite tools to use is the spot healing tool. And we're just gonna kind of pick out those little areas right there. So, I mean, like most young girls, or most young kids in general, teens, they can tend to have some blemishes or patchy areas. And so that's why I use the patch tool for that. I don't do a ton of touch up on hairs, but I do like to do that for some of them that are a little bit more distracting. I work with a lot of kids. Like that's the main focus of what I do. So I find, beauty in the mess of children. So I don't usually, with the younger kids anyways, I don't usually go through and perfect all the itty bitty hairs. All right, I'm gonna get rid of the bobby pin though. Okay, All right. So another thing I like to do, so sometimes I flatten, and I know, well, actually, I'm just going to merge it. People yell at me all the time for flattening layers. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is we're going to do frequency separation. So I'm not sure if you guys know frequency separation or not, but it's a huge, it's an awesome tool for really helping to perfect and fine tune your skin. So I'm going to duplicate my layer twice. And then this top layer, I'm going to turn this off. And I'm going to go down into this first layer that we created, and I'm going to blur that. So we're going to come up here to filter, blur, and we're going to do a Gaussian blur on that. And that is not what I want. So we're going to bring that down. So basically what I'm looking for when I'm doing this is to just barely bring it past the point where you're not seeing any major pore details. Okay, so I'm going to stay about right, maybe about right there is good for me. So I'm going to press OK. Then we're going to come back here and we're going to turn on our top layer here. We're going to come up here to image, apply image. And then you're going to have a series of like all these boxes pop up here. So you can tell I use frequency separation. So when this pops up, this is your file name here, and then you're going to have a layer to choose what it's pulling information from. So what I want it to do is it's going to be that first layer that we blurred. Okay, so that's the one we want to select. And then I change my blending mode to subtract. And then the numbers that you put in here are 2 and 128. And we're going to press OK. And then we're going to come over here to the layer, and we're going to change the blending mode to linear light. Okay, so essentially what we did is we separated the layers of here's your texture layer, and then we have some smoothing of the skin underneath. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and I'm going to group those together. So I'm going to push Command or Control G to put those into a group. And then I'm going to come back down here to our base layer that we blurred. And then I'm going to come up here with my lasso tool. And I like to feather this a little bit so that you're not having like a hard cutout to work with. It's a little bit more feathered, and so you're not seeing any hard lines. And I'm just going to come in here, and I'm really focusing on some of those larger areas where you can see the light is very similar right here in this triangle spot. So once I have that selected, I'm going to come up here to filter, blur, and then we're going to do a Gaussian blur. And then you can kind of see what it's doing to the skin. It's really balancing everything out there. Obviously, you don't want to go too heavy because it's going to start doing weird things. So you're going to kind of find like your happy medium where the skin is being softened, but you're not going to see any like weird darkening spots or anything like that. So about right there is pretty good for me. I'm gonna press OK. And then I'm just going to kind of make my way around the image to do it that way. So filter, and it's going to be blur, Gaussian blur, just to kind of give you a refresher there. I'm going to press OK. Okay, so then I'm just going to, like I said, make my way around the face. And so this is my last command up here, so I'm just going to tap that. And it usually works for the majority of the face, so you don't kind of have to really go back and forth for it, but you do want to watch out for certain areas and pay attention to what you're doing so that you don't have weird areas that you don't know how they got there. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. Let me see here. I might do just a little bit more underneath her eyes, see if we can't darken up those dark areas. So when you're dealing with most people, they have, so the skin underneath the eyes is naturally a little bit thinner. So it's gonna look a little bit darker for everybody, right? And so that's what we're doing here basically, is we're just kind of brightening that up again. Okay, and so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to come up here too, and I'll zoom in for you guys. You feel free to yell at me to zoom in. I have I zoom out quite often because I feel like I can see my flaws a little bit better on a smaller scale, like a thumbnail size. And so sometimes they get stuck, pulled back. So if I do that, feel free to yell at me. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to this layer that has all of our texture on it, and I'm just going to grab my my clone stamp here.
So Shannon, just
Yes.
very quickly, we're not seeing the toolbar on the left side of your screen,
Oh,
so we
okay.
can't see what you are hitting.
Okay, so let me move that over here. How about now? Obviously. Okay.
That's
So
good. Thank you.
of course, yeah, it was just barely off of the page there. So, okay, so coming back, so this is the layer with all the details on it. So if I come over here and I grab my clone stamp tool, and I'm just gonna pick an area where I do like the texture of skin, and then we're just gonna brush that on in the area where we don't necessarily love the texture of skin. So right in here, and I'm at about 79%. And this is also really good for any like areas of the skin where there are those blemishes and it's hard to get rid of, but you want to maintain that texture. This is a fantastic tool for that. And it is what I use. I don't shoot a lot of teens generally, but when I do and they have, you know, skin issues or whatnot, this is what I do to correct that. So with every new area that I'm going to, I'm picking a new sample area to brush over. So I wouldn't take this area right here and put it down here on this smoother part of skin. I want it to look like the area around it. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing the Alt or Option button and then tapping that in that area so that they look the way they need to. I know that this can seem a little bit time consuming. So one question I do get asked quite a bit is if I do this process to all of my photos. And the answer widely is yes. So I do work on an IPS process. So when people pick photos from me, they're not choosing a ton of photos. They're usually choosing anywhere from like, usually we hover around 5 or so. And so I don't mind doing this and perfecting those 5 images. Obviously, you're going to have to charge accordingly to make sure that you're still making money at the end of the day. But yes, I do this for most of my photos. Okay, so this tool is actually also really good if you have any straight eyebrows and you're just not sure what to do with them. You can use the spot healing tool, but this also works really well if you need to edge the sides there, and if you want to like really perfect a brow. Again, depending on the age of who it is that you're working with, I don't go into too much fine tuning of the brows or anything like that, because I just think that a lot of my clients and a lot of the kids that I work with, I like to maintain the look of their youth, and if you go a little bit too far, it can look a little unnatural for the age group that I work with. Okay, I'm gonna zoom out here. All right, so I'm gonna merge those. Okay, so another way I like to perfect the skin, but let's go ahead and do this. I want to brighten up her skin just a little bit here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here. If I were to come over here to my levels adjustment layer, we could definitely play with it that way. But when I bring this up, it is, in my opinion, well, it's blowing out all the details up here in the white and the pearls, and to me it's just overdone in my opinion. This is a little bit too bright for my liking, so I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to do is I'm going to come over here to my quick select tool, okay, and I'm just going to kind of go over here and I'm just going to select her face, okay. And it doesn't really matter how much you grab. You don't really have to be perfect with it, because I will show you why. So now that I have a little bit of a selection, what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my levels adjustment layer. And now you can see the histogram here is dramatically different, because it's basing it off of this instead of all these whites that are up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here to the base of our little mountain, and I'm going to grab this white triangle and I'm going to slide that towards the base there. And what you can see is that area on her face is much brighter. Okay, so you got to be careful not to blow these highlights, because anything else I do to my photo, it's going to mess with that a little bit. So I want to take it down just so that when we end up with it in the end, everything's not completely blown out and weird and kind of funky. So what I'm going to do now that we have our levels adjustment layer, I'm going to come grab a brush, and it's going to be a white brush. I'll make my brush a little bit bigger here, obviously. There we go. All right, so it is at 50%. And what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna brush that back on in the areas that I really actually want that adjustment. So basically, all over her face. And then I will touch on the highlights of her hair. And that gives us a little bit of a better exposure on her face. And I might actually even bring that down, the opacity a little bit on that. And then there we go there, okay? So I'm gonna merge those. Okay, so another thing I like to do to the skin to kind of give it a really nice polished look, almost like extra glowy, it almost like gives it kind of like a dewy look to it when I do this, and that's why I use it. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna duplicate my layer. I'm gonna press OK, and I'm gonna change my blending mode to vivid light. Okay, so obviously this looks a little strange, so we're gonna push Command or Control I to invert it. It's getting weirder. And then we're gonna go up to Filter, Other, and we're gonna do High Pass. So essentially what we're doing here is we're creating a brush on frequency separation. So we're just kind of doing a whole different level of frequency separation. So I'll show you. Okay, so we have this. And so when you come up here to the high pass, you have this slider here. And what I'm looking for when I'm doing this is for, again, for the details in the pores to basically be gone. Just to a point where I'm seeing no blotching in the skin, that sort of a thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna press OK. And then I'm gonna come up here to Filter, Blur, and we're gonna do Gaussian Blur. And then what I'm gonna do is I'm paying attention to basically the skin area, and I'm sliding this until I can see where it's looking nice, it's looking dewy, it's looking creamy, it's not too much. The details are still there. So about, I'm gonna say about, just for the sake of, I'm gonna do it right there, okay? So about like that. So then we obviously have to add a masking layer to it because it's doing weird stuff to her eyes. So we're gonna come down here to this little white box at the bottom. We're gonna press the little dot. And we don't want that applied to the whole image. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna push Command or Control I to invert that. And now all we have to do is come over here with the heavy white brush, and we can literally brush on that adjustment to the areas of skin that we want it. And I'll zoom in here a little more for you guys. The one thing with this, when you're brushing this on, you do have to be careful around the edges because it does create like this weird, like dark halo if you get too close to the edges. So I usually stick to the larger surfaces of skin and avoid the edges. So around the lips, I avoid around the eyes, I avoid around the nostrils, sometimes the edges of the jawline, that sort of thing. And once I get done with this, I'll click it off and on so you can kind of see what it's doing here. I'm not sure if you guys can tell on your end. So basically, it just kind of takes that skin to the next level of polishing. This is really good too if your client has kind of crazy makeup and you need to blend it in a little bit more and you need it to maintain a skin texture. This is really good for that. So I can see it's kind of doing funky things right there. So I'm going to erase that. And I think that's looking pretty good there. So you can kind of see the difference. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the eyes. So there's so many different ways that you can work with eyes, bring out the details of the eyes. So I'll show you one way that I like to do it. So first of all, we're going to kind of bring up the highlights of the whites in her eyes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here to my curves adjustment layer. And then you're going to see this guy pop over here. And I'm going to drag from the middle. And you're going to want to pay attention to the whites of the eyes when you're doing this to see kind of how bright they're getting. You don't want them to be completely whited out or anything like that. And then over here on your layer, you're going to go to your blending modes and you're going to change your blending mode to luminosity. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we are going to invert that. So Command or Control I to invert that. And then with that, you can again go in with your white brush. And I'm going to start with a low opacity just so we have a little bit more control here. So I'm at 26%. And I'm actually going to bring down the flow too here. Okay. And so when I do the eyes, so you have to think about the eyes, and the eyes are actually, the eyes are spherical, right? So if you were to lay a ball on a table next to some sunlight, you can see the way the light wraps around the ball, where the shadows hit. So you're not going to want to block out all of the white. So when I do eyes, I tend to start at the bottom and I hover on the bottom of the eyes, and then I'll kind of bring it up a little bit around the iris. And I generally tend to avoid, oops, we're using a black brush. That's not going to do anything. So you have to use a white brush. Okay, so again, I stay at the bottom half of the eyes, and then I'll scoop up around the iris. So I do generally tend to avoid the shadows. So the corners of the eyes, just so, again, so the eyeball stays spherical. And then I always avoid underneath the lash line. So this area is supposed to be shadowed because of the lashes. So you want to make sure you maintain that. So same thing on this side, we're going to hover at the bottom. So if you've never used a tablet and you're kind of wondering what I'm doing here, my tablet is pressure sensitive. So when I'm doing things like this, the lighter I push, the less it's grabbing or applying to what we're doing. So, and then the heavier I push, the harder the effect is going to go on, or heavier, I guess. So I do like the way it's kind of lightening everything. So I am going to just kind of touch up on kind of these areas. So this is called the waterline. And it's called the waterline because that's where your tear ducts are, and it's generally wet looking. So if you maintain those highlights, you can kind of keep your eyes looking nice and glassy looking. And I usually tap that too right here in the corners as well. So basically anywhere you're seeing those highlights. Okay, and I'm gonna zoom out just so you guys can kind of see where we're at. And then there's the eyes. And if for whatever reason you feel like it's a little bit too heavy, you just come over here and you can change the opacity on that. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I want to brighten up the irises of her eyes, okay? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go in here and, so there's a couple of ways that we could do this. So I'm gonna start by doing, I'll just show you a couple ways. So a couple ways you can do this. So I'm on my base layer here. So I've grabbed my lasso tool. Of a 30% feather is not gonna work in this case. So I'm just gonna do a five pixel feather. And I am going to draw on our catch lights. Our shape lights. So these are the catch lights, and the eyeball is, there's some depth to it, right? So when the light goes into the eye, it's gonna pool into the opposite end of where the catch light is. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do a little bit of a crescent shape here. And then I'm holding shift so I can do it on the other side as well. Same thing, a crescent shape. And then you can come over here to your curves adjustment layer and you can bring that up. So that's one way to do it, which I actually do like that way, but I'm gonna show you another way just for the fun of it. Okay, so we're gonna turn that off. And I'm gonna create a new layer. So layer, new layer. And so this is just a whole new other way that you can brighten up the whites of those eyes. So if you come over here and you grab a white brush, let's zoom in here. So white brush. And I'm at about a 20% there. And you can just brush that on. And then if you come over here and you just change it to overlay, you can see it did pretty much the same thing. But I do think that I like this way better. So we're gonna go ahead with that first way that I showed you. Okay, so then what I like to do is I'm actually going to brighten up the catch lights themselves. So I'm gonna come up here to my levels adjustment layer, and just looking at the catch lights, I'm gonna slide this white triangle over towards the base, and you can see it's gonna brighten it up quite a bit. Okay. And then I'm gonna invert that. So Command or Control I to invert that. And then all we have to do is grab a white brush and brush that on. This is another really great tool too if you wanted to pop the waterline even more. So like sometimes I'll come in here with a white brush and I'll just kind of tap it on in these areas. And then right in here during these highlights again. And then if for whatever reason you wanted to bring out her eyes even more, you can still use that brush, same brush. And you can brush that on like the details of the eyes. So you know how like the eyes they have those lines in them and all sorts of fun stuff. So you can really get in there and draw in your own details to the eyes and really make them look unique and perfected. This is also really good for, I like to make the Cupid's bow a little bit brighter. It's a little too heavy of a brush. So I'm gonna bring down my opacity on that a little bit. And then you can actually use it to highlight the lips as well. All right, let me zoom out for you guys so you can kind of see what's going on here. And that really brought that up quite a bit. Okay. So another thing that I like to do, so we're just gonna, I'm gonna merge all those together, and I'm gonna start doing some contouring. I'm gonna do a little bit of liquefy and a few other things. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to merge all of those layers together. So if I push Shift, Option, Command, E, it's what's called a stamp visible. So it basically takes all of your layers that you have there and puts them all into one place. Okay, so they're all speaking to each other at this point, and it's like your image is flat. Okay, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go in here and I'm actually gonna liquefy because there's certain parts of her hair that I don't love. So we're gonna come up here to Filter, Liquefy. And then I'm just gonna start kind of pushing the hair around the way I like it, just so it kind of looks a little bit more flowing. It looks a little bit more put together, that sort of a thing. A little more visually appealing, I guess. So if you don't use the liquefy tool very much, it's this whole panel is pretty amazing, actually. Right now I'm using this little one that looks like you're pushing like a paper clip across the table.
I think
And
we're
so I'm just kind of,
missing. Sorry, Shannon. I think we're
yeah,
missing the side of your screen again.
this guy on the screen.
Can you reduce
Oh,
the size of that window a wee bit?
yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
How about now? Is it in place
Yeah,
now?
that looks
Okay.
great.
All right, sorry guys. Yeah, so in Liquefy, here's this little pusher I was talking about. And you can change your brush size up here to the top right. And you can kind of push it around a little bit. I use this to shape dresses. I use it to shape hair. I use it for double chins for the back of the arms. I use it for, there's so many different things that you can that you can use it for. I actually will correct people's posture a lot of times and make them look like if they're a little bit too slumped. I can actually obviously lengthen their neck and bring their back in and make them look a little bit better posed, I guess. But one of these cool things that you can play with when you come into Liquefy is it has all these panels that are in Creative Cloud. They're fairly new. So you can actually change the eye size, you can change the nose, you can actually add a smile if you want. So I'm gonna show you kind of some of those things. I'm not gonna leave them like that, but just so you guys kind of get an idea. So when you go to the eyes, you have your left eye and then you have your right eye. And if you bring it up, so we're looking at this eye right here, I believe. And you can kind of see it get bigger. So this is one of those tools that I think a lot of people are using now when you're seeing like those really surreal images. So you can actually do it, like we'll make that 0. But yeah, you can change the eyes. You can come down here and you can make her frown, or you can make her smile. It's kind of creepy, but I have used it plenty of times on kids if I need just enough of a smirk so they don't look completely miserable. You can change the lip. You can bring it up. You can bring it down. You can. There really is so many things that you can do here just to kind of give it a little bit of an extra And half the time, clients really don't know the difference, but you can change the forehead. You can actually change the chin height, so you can bring your chin up and down. Right there. And then you can change the jawline, so you can bring that in a little bit more. And you can actually change the face width. And so she looks a little bit more pixie-like, in my opinion. So anyways, there's one thing you can do. It is fun to play with. You just got to be careful about not getting too carried away with it, unless you're doing a surreal edit. So anyways, okay, moving on. So what do I want to do next? So I think I'm actually going to go in, and I like to make my images a little bit more moody. So a couple things I like to do is I will actually use a whole color layer over the top of my images. So depending on what it is, like to me, she looks a little bit more, I don't know, Renaissance or almost like old world. So I want to kind of change the coloring a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do file, or excuse me, layer, new layer. We're going to press OK. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and I'm going to grab a color from in her hair, like kind of like a caramely color, like kind of a deep, there you go, that's pretty good. And then what we're going to do is we're going to just fill in the layer. So you can do edit fill if you want to, and you can do the color, and you can come back to your color if you want to. I mean, there's so many ways you can fill in this layer. Press OK, and there we have a color fill layer. So then what I usually do is I play with my blending modes a little bit. So if like, let's, for instance, overlay, and then I'm gonna bring my opacity way down. But what this does is it kind of gives me just enough, it takes off just enough of that white, pure edge to it, and it kind of gives us like a little bit more of a moody look to it. But I don't want it to necessarily apply everywhere. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a masking layer to that. And then with a brush, I'm going to come in here with a black brush. And I'm going to just kind of brush that off real lightly out of certain areas. So I want her blue eyes to still be noticeably blue. And I will kind of tap it off of certain highlights. And that looks pretty good to me. And it kind of gave her a little bit of a rosiness to her cheeks too. So I like to do that for my images. Okay, so one thing that's bothering me too is that we're not seeing a whole lot of highlights in her hair right here. So I'm gonna change that. What I'm gonna do in this case is I'm gonna come over here to my levels adjustment layer. You're probably picking up on a theme. I really love my levels adjustment layers. I use them often for so many different things. And this is, like, in my opinion, a really good key to knowing Photoshop. If you know what these tools can do for you, you hold so much power. Okay, so in our levels, we're just gonna bring this up here. And I'm just kind of looking at this area right here. And then I'm gonna bring down my midtones a little. Okay, and I'm gonna push Command or Control I to invert that. You could always go in and you can paint it too if you wanted to. I know a lot of people are into painting, which I definitely love to paint. Okay, so we're gonna have a white brush. We're nice and small. So when I am drawing hairs, I will get down to almost pretty close to 1 pixel when I'm doing this. And I'll just come in here and I'll start. We're gonna go pretty heavy, 100%. And I'll just literally just start bringing in those hairs. Again, this is why I use a tablet. This is why tablets are so fantastic for all these details, because you just have so much control over it. Okay. And we could spend all day drawing hairs. And I do sometimes. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do another merge stamp visible of all that. So Shift, Option, Command, E. And so now we have our other stamp visible here. And so what I'm gonna do with that is I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start to contour. Before I contour, I'm going to explain a little bit like what contouring is. So I think, okay, so these are actually some pretty good examples of the ways you contour. So when I was a makeup artist, this is essentially how we did it, or at least this is a guide of where you place the darker shades and where you place the lighter shades. So you have what's called the T-zone, okay, so we're of highlight. So it's going to be across the forehead and down the nose into the chin. And then obviously we have the highlights of the cheeks. So you have to think about it. If you have a light above you, it's anywhere the sun is going to hit is going to be where you want your highlights. So like I said, these little white areas there. And then when I was describing contouring to people when I was doing makeup, and I always told them it was like an E and a 3, right? So you have an E and you have a 3 and it's on your face and it kind of scoops one way down across the forehead, under the cheekbones, and down the side of the jawline. Okay, and then a lot of people do like to contour the sides of their nose. So this is a little bit of another pretty good example. I would never personally put white makeup on somebody this dark, but to each their own. But anyways, this is a really good example of where you would put the highlights and the darker shades when you are contouring in Photoshop or if you're doing makeup. So let's kind of go back to that. So we created our stamp visible here, okay? So now what we're going to do is we're going to, in our history panel, we're going to come to our very bottom stamp visible. So our history brush is on right there, okay? So then you're actually going to come over here to your history brush. Oops, sorry, I'm going to have to duplicate that. So duplicate your stamp visible, and now we're pretty good. Okay, so you come over here to your history brush, and then you have your brush up here. So multiply is how we're going to make things a little bit darker. So currently I'm at about 6%, but I will hover between 6% to 10%, depending on what it is. So your image it can get pretty heavy pretty quick, so you do have to pay attention. And so I have a soft brush, a soft, like I said, like a soft brush, so it's feathered, and it's at 6% there. And so what we're gonna do is, you can kind of see here, so down the sides of the face, under the cheekbone, under the jawline, and a lot of times too, when I'm contouring, is I will always touch underneath the lip, just to kind of give it a little bit more of a pout. And then I down the Cupid's bow. And then sometimes I'll contour the eyes a little bit more. It really kind of depends on how dramatic you want this to be, what you're doing. I mean, you can go pretty heavy and get pretty surreal with something like this, or you can keep it pretty light if you're just dealing with, you know, your everyday senior clients and whatnot. Okay, so then to add a little bit of highlight to things, all we have to do is come up here. We're going to change it to screen mode. And I'm going to brush on some highlights. So I'm going to touch right underneath the brows. A lot of times I do take care of like a little bit of this dark triangle in between the brows as well. And then across the forehead. Give her a little bit of a Rembrandt here. Cupid's bow, the lip, and then we'll do a little bit of the chin. And then you can even, if you need to brighten up the eyes a little bit more too, you can. And if for whatever reason you feel like this is looking a little bit too heavy, you can go back and just go back to your normal. And you can tap that off of areas where you felt like maybe it got a little out of control. But you can also come over here to your opacity and you can bring that down. But before I do that, I'm going to show you kind of what it did. So you can kind of see how much it contoured it with just using it at 6%. Okay, so I'm going to bring that down just a little. And that's looking pretty good. So I am just about done with this one, I think, but I do want to add, so one thing I'm a huge fan of is darkening the corners, almost adding somewhat of a vignette, but also adding in light. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here, I'm going to do a little bit of a like a hazy halo. I know it's not everybody's taste, but it is something that I enjoy doing. So I'm going to do a new layer. Okay. And then I'm going to come over here to my orb. So my gradient tool here, and you want to pick up the orb gradient here. So it's the little dot. When you do this, you want to make sure that you are in the square that transitions from a color into the checker box. And the checker box represents the transparency. Okay. So now that I'm there, I want to pick a nice warm shade that I'm going to kind of fade in. So think of it almost as like a light leak. Okay. So I'm going to do like a nice soft, kind of a warm color in this case. And then all you have to do, I'm currently at 100%, but I'm going to bring that down. We're at 68% now. And I'm going to start up at the corner. And I'm just going to bring that towards her. And it looks a little obnoxious right now, but I'm going to push Command or Control T. And you can, it doesn't have to stay a circle. You can kind of smoosh it around any way you want. And again, it's kind of acting as like a little bit of a light leak. Okay, and then you can come back here and you can bring down your opacity on that. And then I'm going to add a masking layer to it. And then I'm going to brush that off of her face. There we go. What's nice about this too is if you feel like the haze is just not, you don't like the haze and you want it, but you still want to maintain a little bit of that color, you can just come over here and change the blending mode to soft light. And it's still there. And you can bring back that opacity a bit. But it's essentially acting as a, it's warming it up. And actually, I think I like that better even. But it just kind of brightened up that area and warmed up that area so it wasn't quite so dark. And then I am actually going to go in and I'm going to do one more thing just to kind of draw a little bit more attention to her face. I'm going to do an exposure adjustment layer. And I'm going to bring down my exposure. And I'm going to up my gamma just a little. And then I'm going to come back with my gradient tool. And this time, we're still going to use the orb, but we're going to change the transition from a black to a white, from the color to the transparency to a black and white gradation. And so we're going to start right at her face. We're going to bring that out. And we're going to need to add 100%. There we go. And then you can actually go back in with a black brush and bring back certain areas that you definitely know that you want to stay light. So about right in here. And then we just did all that to the corner, so we're going to take that off of there. And that is about where I would think I would land. So the last thing I would probably do is I'm going to do another stamp visible. I'm going to merge all those together. I'm going to duplicate my layer. I'm going to press OK. And then I'm going to come up here to Filter, Other, High Pass. And I'm going to bring it to about 5, a radius of 5. If it's a little bit over, that's okay. Press OK. And essentially what I'm doing is I am sharpening. I'm going to use it as a sharpening tool. So I'm going to change the blending mode to soft light. And you can see how much it sharpened it. I don't like to necessarily sharpen the whole image, so I will invert that so it's invisible. And then I'll use a white brush and I'll brush it on the areas that I want to stay nice and crisp. So her eyes, I'll do a little bit on her cheeks and the details, and I'll do around the areas of the face. And then I would go ahead and I would leave it at that. And then I would save it and share it and give it to my client, all that fun stuff. Anybody have any questions about that one?
I think everyone is just stunned how gorgeous this is.
Oh.
It's amazing.
It's so funny because I'm sitting here and I hear nothing and I'm just talking, which I'm actually used to because I do all the videos and whatnot. But yeah, so that's about where I would land. If for whatever reason I wanted to go back and double check my levels and bring it up a little bit, I definitely could do that and make sure that we are a little bit more on point. So, all right. Do we?
Okay, I do have a couple of quick questions. So what is the difference between merging layers and flattening a layer?
So merging layers, you are going to still maintain, oh gosh, you know what, I'm so not technical, but in my understanding is when you're merging the layers, you are still maintaining, you're not taking away from the quality. When you're flattening, I believe you do take away a little bit of the quality. And I believe that that's the difference, but I could be very wrong on that.
Okay, and the other one, people are asking if they can see the original compared to the finished version.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So let me just go up here in my history. So there's the original. So I had cropped it down for us, but it was a horizontal image. So there's the original. And there is our final.
Wow. I'm blown away.
You know, and it's funny too, because it just feels like really tiny baby steps. And then you do that and you're like, wow, we did a lot of work.
Yeah. So before we move on, I want to remind everybody that we are recording this, so you don't need to keep scribbling notes. I know people are trying to keep up. So it's recorded. You will be able to come back and watch it later. But please carry on. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I'm happy to also, if you guys want to see this in a little bit of a better quality, I can also email this picture to Kath and Christy, and so you guys can actually see it.
That will be wonderful. Thank you.
Of course. So, okay, so we have time for another one? Should I keep going?
Absolutely. Keep going.
Okay, let's keep going. Okay, so this is one of my favorite models and people that I've worked with in my career. Okay, so this girl actually, I worked with her since she was a senior. I did her senior photos a handful of years ago, actually, right before I left California to come to Colorado. So when I first shot her, she had all of her hair. So she has alopecia, and so it affects the follicles of her hair. She's perfectly healthy, but it does affect the follicles on the top of her head so that she loses all of it. So this is Kayla. She's absolutely stunning, and it's funny too, and this is kind of like a testament to photos, and the power that they do have for people is she wore wigs up until she came out here. She flew from California to Colorado to see me, and we decided to do some photo shoots of her just bald, and right after the photo shoot, she she stopped wearing her wigs. It gave her enough confidence to kind of continue on just as being who she is. Okay, so let's dive in here. Okay, so we are gonna go ahead and start with frequency separation. So she is like 21, 22. She does have a little bit of acne. She has a little bit more mature skin, and aside from the other little girl or younger girl that we just worked with, who, believe it or not, is only, I think, 13, something like that. So anyways, we're gonna go ahead and do this. So we're gonna start with frequency separation again. So I'm just going to Command J, and we're gonna do a couple of new layers here again. Okay, so we're gonna come in and we're going to go ahead and we're gonna blur that base layer. So filter, blur, Gaussian blur. You know what, actually, let's not do it this way. I am going to back up here, and I'm gonna show you just how to do the brush on frequency separation, just to kind of give you an idea of the difference between the two and how different they are, I guess, in terms of how they can work for you. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna do the duplicate layer. Okay, and we're going to change the blending mode to vivid light. And I'm going to push Command or Control I to invert that. Okay, then we're going to do filter, other, high pass. Okay, so I'm going to bring that up until I'm not really seeing very much texture in the skin. So about right there is pretty good. I'm going to press OK. Then we're going to come up here to filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Okay, so you can see it's already done so much for the skin. It's looking really dewy, almost metallic even. So she does have a highlighter on her cheek that is metallic, which is actually not my favorite thing, but in cases like this where it's kind of a little bit more high fashion, we can definitely work with it. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of mess with our radius until we see our skin liking the way we like it. I think that's pretty good right there. I'm going to go ahead and press OK. And then I'm going to add a masking layer to that. And I'm going to invert it so that we can brush this on. So again, this is like my version of a brushing on of the frequency separation. Okay, so we're at 100% because we adjusted it perfectly for her skin. So it doesn't really matter how heavy I brush it on. And this is like a really good tool too. I know a lot of people use the frequency separation in general, but this is a really good one if you know how to make actions for yourself, to make it as an action. Though you would have to be careful because I do find that it acts differently depending on if your subject's a little bit farther away or if they are closer up. It doesn't work as well for farther away subjects. But you can see it does really nicely on like the follicles on her head, highlights there. Oops. Okay. Really good. There's a little bit of blotchiness on her arms, so we're going to go ahead and take care of that also. So down here is actually a pretty good place to go ahead and do the frequency separation. Does everybody actually know how to do frequency separation? So if I use my my action that I have, is everybody okay with that? Just for the sake of saving time? Or do you want me to show you frequency separation again?
I think a couple of people would like to see it again, so
Sure,
run through it.
No worries. I just don't want to bore everybody to death. Okay,
think we're fascinated, so keep going.
Okay. Okay. So before I move on, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you kind of what that looks like and how much it did for her skin. So that's looking pretty good. Okay. All right. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to merge the layers. Okay. Okay. So this is frequency separation. So Command J, so it just duplicates those layers for us. So we're going to turn off the top layer, and that bottom layer, we're going to go in, we're going to do a filter. We're going to do blur, and we're going to do a Gaussian blur. Okay. Give it a minute there to think. And then we're going to bring our slider up until we see that the skin's just blurred enough here that we're kind of not seeing that detail anymore, just barely. Okay. I'm going to press OK there. And then we're going to turn back on our top layer. So we're going to go up to the top layer here. We're going to go to Image, and then we're going to do Apply Image. Okay. And so this is going to pop up here. So this is your file name here. It'll usually say whatever you named it. I just had a raw file there. And so I'm going to change it. And as you want it to pull information from this first layer. So you can say it says layer 1, and then there's, you know, layer 1 copy. So you can name it whatever you want, but in this case, it's layer 1. Okay. And you want the blending mode to be subtract. And then the scale is going to be 2 and the offset's going to be 128. So I didn't come up with that. It's just kind of the predetermined numbers for frequency separation. And we'll press OK. And then we're going to change it to linear light. Okay. And so then I like to go ahead and group those together. So Command or Control G. Okay. And then we're going to go into our base, that blurred layer there. And I'm going to pick a lasso tool, and I'm going to feather it at about 30%. So again, we don't want any harsh lines. So this will help us to maintain like kind of a feathered look, a feathered selection. Okay. So I'm going to pick a pretty big spot here. And we're going to do filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And then we're going to slide that till we see that it's kind of little as balanced as we would like it to be. So that's pretty good right there. Okay. And then we're going to just go around to those areas and do the same thing. Okay. And then you can come up here. Let me zoom in for you guys too. So yeah, I'm like leaning into my screen trying to see it when really I could just zoom in myself. So I can only imagine what you guys are feeling like right now. Okay. Okay. I think that's pretty good. I'll do one more area here. Good. Okay, so now what we can do too is if we go to that layer that has the texture on it, so it's the one that looks like it's gray, and we can just kind of go in here with our clone stamp. And we're at a pretty high opacity right now, so it's at 85%. So again, all you have to do is hold the Alt or Option button, and you brush that. You're choosing areas of the skin that you want to replicate there. So right here. And you're basically matching textures, but getting rid of the larger blemishes and bumps that you maybe don't want. It's really great for scars and laugh lines. This is also really good too if you see like their makeup is kind of out of sorts. So like say you have rough lipstick job, you can actually come in here and clean it up. Her mom's actually a makeup artist, and so is she. So they did pretty good with their makeup. I don't have to worry too much.
So we have a question. How close are you cloning? So you're cloning right next to the piece you're removing? Oh,
Yeah, so basically what I'm looking for is somewhere as close to the blemish or whatnot that looks better, right? So if I'm looking, so here we have this blemish, and I'm going to pick the closest spot to that that's clear. So there's a blemish there, so I'm going to pick an area that's not blemished, so about right there, and brush over it. So I mean, you want it to be pretty close to it so that you're maintaining the same texture because depending on how the light's hitting it or the shadows or whatnot, you can see how different it changes, right? If you're having some fall off from your lens or whatever the situation may be, it's all going to affect the texture or the look of the texture of the skin. So this area right here obviously is a little bit too smooth. So for instance, if I were to go and I picked like this area because it looks really pretty and it looks really smooth, and I went up here, you could tell that it's doing that weird, almost a blurring effect to the texture. So we don't actually want to do that. So when I'm right there next to it, I'm picking, so this area right here looks pretty good. And then I'm just kind of going over those areas that I want to cover up. So it's literally right next to it as much as possible.
okay. And would you smooth some of the lines on the lips, or do you leave them be?
Oh no, I don't know. You know what? I personally, I just feel like lips are, I mean, they're textured. So I have never smoothed lips. Some
Okay.
people might. I guess it just kind of depends. I feel like there's certain things that make a face believable and make it real. And lines are one of them. You know, I'm not going to go in here and take care of any of these lines really. If there's like a cake, you know, buildup of a caking of makeup or something, I possibly would. But in general, I kind of leave the reality of things. I will say though, if you go in here to the lips and you're seeing certain areas where maybe you're not liking it, so like maybe it was a little bit chapped right there. You see that? So you definitely can go in and fix that. I don't think it's anything that a client would ever, you know, be mad at me for if I were to leave it. If it is overly noticeable, obviously, I think, you know, if you're competing in image competition or whatnot, they might notice something like that. I think it depends on the judge.
Okay,
Truth be
thank you.
told, right?
We have at least one judge on the call.
I,
um,
I figured.
yeah, and I notice you're using the current layer on the clone stamp. That's important, isn't it?
Yes. Okay. So it is. So it's this layer here that has all the texture on it from the frequency separation. And so that's the one you want to be working on because that's where all the texture is. Because basically what we're doing is we're just cloning texture, like textures. We're not actually taking any of the coloring. It's literally just cloning over texture. Does that make sense?
Thank
Oh,
you.
okay. All right, so we could totally do this all day long. I mean, you could go in here too if you wanted to, but you know, in the grand picture of it all, I don't think you'll notice too much of that. But you definitely could. I mean, if you wanted to, let's try it for fun. There we go. Is that the lines we were talking about, or just these lines on the actual lips? Okay.
A little of both, probably, but I think we've covered that.
Okay, good. And really, I mean, everything you're going to do is not necessarily going to be exactly how I do it. Some things are going to bother me more than they bother other people, and vice versa. So it really is about knowing the tools and what they can do for you. And then you can do so many things if you just know the tools. It's a little bit easier to know the tools and create your own style than trying to pull your hair out, trying to be my style. Okay, so that's looking pretty good there. Oh, maybe there. The computer's pinwheel of death. Okay, there we go. Okay, so I think that's pretty good there. So I will show you what that looks like now. So it's just enough to get it to that next level. Okay, so then we're going to go ahead and we're going to merge those. And then we're going to go in and we're going to, I mean, you're going to have to be careful too about, because her highlights are so strong. If you were to go do like say a levels adjustment layer, it's going to be pulling information based off of these highlights, right? So if you bring this over, you're going to get those really strong highlights, but everything else is going to pop as well, which this isn't entirely horrible. It might be a little bit bright just because we're going to do some other things to it. And so this is actually kind of one of those things too, where I like to start creating and building up a vignette around my client or my subject in my photo. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go, because I have this levels adjustment layer, I mean, this looks pretty good. If we need to bring down the highlights a little bit later, we definitely can. But in this case, what we're going to do is we have our masking layer here. We're going to come over here to our gradient. And we're going to be on the orb gradient tool. And you can already see it's transitioning from a black to a white. We're at 100%. And I'm going to come over here and I'm going to drag from her face and I'm going to drag it outward. Okay, and so you can see that it maintained those highlights on her face, but it left the deeper coloring of the corners of the overall image, okay, which is what I'm wanting, because it all is going to draw us into her face, okay? All right, so we want to go ahead and brighten up her eyes. You can tell that her eyes are basically, I mean, they're basically black, right? But we don't want to leave them that way. We want to add a little bit more life to them. So in this case, if I were to use a white brush and then put it in overlay mode, it wouldn't work here because her eyes are so dark. So basically what we do need to do is we need to go in there and we're going to get a lasso tool and we want to feather it. We don't want 30, we don't want it feathered at 30 because if we do that, it's not going to pick up any pixels because it's going to be so feathered it basically eliminates itself because the selection is going to be so small. So what we're going to do is we're going to come in here and we're going to do a crescent shape at the opposite side of the catch lights. So same thing over here. If you push the shift button, you can do another selection. And that looks pretty good there. So then we're going to come, when we have a selection here, we can bring up our curves adjustment layer. And all you have to do is bring up from the middle and you can see it's slowly highlighting her eyes. You do got to be careful not to make it too crazy. That looks pretty. Good. Okay, so when you think about it, her eyes are so dark they're almost black. And if you're lightening, I can't talk right now. If you're lightening a black, it's going to go to gray, right? So her eyes aren't gray. So what we can do is we can come over here and we can come over to our color balance adjustment layer. And we're going to go in our midtones. We're going to up the reds. We're going to up the yellows. And then we're going to go into our highlights and we're going to do the same thing. So you're going to up your yellows, you're going to up your reds, and then obviously this looks crazy, so we're going to invert this. So we're going to Command or Control I to invert it. And then all you have to do so that her eyes aren't gray is you get a white brush and we're at 100% and you can go in and you can bring that color back into her eyes.
Can you zoom in a little so we can
Oh
see
yes,
that better?
absolutely. All right. So, and then what's nice too, if you're working on your adjustment layers, so obviously this looks maybe a little bit too red. So what we can do is, because we have our adjustment layers, we can go back in and we can fix it so it's more on the yellow side rather than the red side. And then her eyes are more of a caramel color than gray. And then if you feel like it's, again, too much or too bright, you can go ahead and you can bring down your opacity. That looks good. Okay, so then I'm actually going to, I want to brighten up the whites of her eyes just a little bit. So we're going to use our curves adjustment layer, and I'm going to pull up from the center, and I'm going to change the blending mode on that to luminosity. And basically what that does is it kind of gives us more of like instead of having like so much contrasting color, it kind of gives us like a flatter, smoother overall highlight rather than like a contrasty color, if that makes sense at all. So go back here, Command or Control I invert it, maybe. There we go. Okay, so then we use a white brush. And I'm going to be around 20% or so. 23 words. And again, so we want to make sure that we stay at the bottom half of the eye and then up around the iris, maintaining the shadows in the corners and the shadows underneath the lashes. All right. Again, you can use this highlight for a couple of different things. It just kind of depends on what you want it to be. Yeah, I think I'll wait. Okay. So let me zoom out so you can see it. And that looks pretty good. Might fix that little part right there. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna merge visible or stamp visible. All right, and then I am going to use my spot healing tool. And I'm gonna fix this guy. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring this into liquify too. So I'm going to do filter liquify. There's a couple things I want to adjust on it. So I do want to take care of that eyebrow. Oh man. Okay. Just got to have good eyebrows. All right, so I'm going to push this in a little bit here just because that little sharp edge is kind of bugging me a little bit. So this is nice too. If you feel like you want to give somebody a little bit more of a like a sassy look too, you can actually go in and raise their eyebrows. Let me back up and I'll show you. So I'm going to use a slightly bigger brush, and I'm just going to push up this arch a little more. And same here. And it's just going to open the eyes a lot more too. I mean, you do have to be careful about not distorting certain areas. So for instance, right here, you want to still make sure you're maintaining the shape of the eyes. I'll show you. See what that did? So it'll open the eyes a lot more. And then if you wanted to, you can go in and we'll play with her. I feel like with adults, you can kind of play with their features a little bit more. I feel bad changing children's features, but I know Kayla, she won't care. So we're gonna mess with the upper lip just a little bit. You can kind of bring that up. Actually, I'm bring that one I'm gonna bring the lower lip down a little bit. And you can create like more of a pout by bringing her lips in a little bit closer together, like the width of them. Let's do the jawline a little. There you go. This always makes me laugh a little bit because it just changes it so much. It changes it, like it still looks like her, but it has done so much to her face to just change her overall feel and the overall look and her overall mood in the picture. All right, so we're doing pretty good here. One thing I do want to do is I want to pop these feathers just a little bit. So I'm going to come over here to my levels adjustment layer. I'm going to slide this up, and I'm basically just kind of looking at the feathers at this point. I'm going to make them nice and rich looking. So I inverted that so we can't see it. So now all I have to do is use a white brush. And we can brush this on. Let me get a bigger brush, or a heavier opacity here. With something like this, you do have to be a little bit careful about haloing. If I were to come outside of the feathers here, you might see like a weird halo happening. You don't want to do that. Okay, let's see where that puts us. Yeah. So it made the feathers pop so much more. And then you can even check the histogram too here on them, and you can bring them up even more. Like you can just brighten them up and deepen those shadows. There you go. You just want to make sure they don't get too, the whites, you don't want the whites too white and you don't want the blacks too black. You want to make sure that they're a little bit more on the balanced end. Okay, so we're getting pretty close, guys. So she's pretty easy. Let's go ahead and do a little bit of contouring here before we do too much more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to merge Stamp Visible again. And then I'm going to duplicate my layer. Okay, and then I'm going to come over here, and on your history panel of all the little steps that you took, you want to make sure you check this box for your history brush. Then we're going to come over here to our history brush, and we're going to choose multiply. And I'm at 6%. And then you're just going to, I'm just basically, in this case, following the shadows that are already there.
So we have a question about the Stamp Visible. Can you explain that a little more?
The which ones?
Stamp Visible?
Oh, Stamp Visible, yes. So Stamp Visible basically is, it takes all of the layers underneath it, okay, and it puts them into one spot, okay? So basically everything I just did to adjust it to the image is now on one image. It's basically like as if you were flattened it, but you still maintain all of this information. You can actually still go back if for whatever reason you needed to. Okay, so that's basically what a Stamp Visible is. Now to create a Stamp Visible, and I'll show you too again how to do that once I do this little bit of a contour here. And the command to do a stamp visible is Shift Option Command E, and you hold all of those at the same time. And I know it sounds like a lot of, you have your fingers all over the place. Lots of buttons to push. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a little bit of highlighting. So we're going to do screen mode to do the highlights. So I like to start underneath the brows and highlight the brows. We'll do a little bit on the eyes. The brows. We'll do in between the brows and that darker area. And on the lips. And then you can actually even come in here and we're gonna up the opacity on that. And you can brighten up some of these feathers, make them pop a little more. And that looks pretty good. All right, so, okay, so I'm gonna do a stamp visible for you again, just to give you an example. So it's, again, it's taking all of those layers underneath and kind of putting them into one spot, so that you don't have to go back to all the different layers. Everything, all the information that we created underneath this stamp visible is on one page now, if that makes sense. So now you're gonna have to, so to do that, so it's Shift, Option, Command, E. Okay, and so you can see it, it just popped up right here, and there it is. So I'm pretty good here. I might create a little bit more of a vignette around that. So I'm gonna do that with my exposure adjustments layer, and I'm gonna bring down my exposure a little bit, and I'm gonna up my gamma. And then I'm gonna come in here with my gradient tool here. And we're going to be transitioning from a white to black or black to white, whichever's there, 100%. And obviously this is the opposite of what I want it to do. So all you have to do is push Command I, and then it inverts that. And then you can always go back in with a black brush if you feel like you need to bring it back in certain areas. And I will just brush that off. Thinking, there we go. Oh, we had a white brush. I was wondering what it was doing here. Okay, so black brush. And there we go. I think that's all I would do. I mean, I think color, I mean, I don't know. When it gets late, my eyes get weird. So I might, let's change the color a little bit on the background, just for the sake of, just for fun. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is so I did a color balance adjustment layer, and I'm gonna add, I want to essentially add more green. The background has a little bit too much yellow to it, and almost has a hint of magenta. I don't know if anybody else can see that, but that's kind of what I'm feeling. So I definitely want to add a little bit more green to it. I almost want to bring in those bluey greens that are in the feathers. So I'm gonna go to my highlights and up my greens. Add a little blue, maybe a touch of cyan there. Okay. All right, so I might actually do it this way too, as far as erasing it. So one quick way you can kind of do this too, we'll see if Photoshop will do it for us. Okay, so you can come up here to your quick select tool, and if you push select subject, Photoshop usually is pretty good about pulling them out, and they did. I mean, they did a pretty good job. And then you can kind of come back over here to your masking box, and you can use your black brush, and you can brush that off of them. Okay, and we'll do a deselect. We'll just kind of tap that around so that it doesn't look like it has hard edges or anything. And then I might actually go back in with a white brush and further add to the green of those certain parts of those feathers, right? So I want to bring that back. White brush. Just to kind of bring in, have them all match there. Okay. Oh yeah, I think I like that way better. Hopefully you guys do too. There's a little spot that it didn't get, so I need to get in there in that little area right there. So I'm gonna just get a small brush and I'm gonna brush that on. And that looks pretty good. Last thing I think we will do is we're going to stamp visible, and we're going to do a small amount of sharpening. So we're going to go to filter, other, high pass, and we're going to come down to about 5, a radius of 5. I'm going to press OK. And then we're going to change the blending mode to soft light. And then I'm gonna add a masking layer because I don't want to apply a heavy sharpening all over the whole thing. I prefer it just to be in certain areas like the eyes. So I'm gonna Command or Control I to invert that. Oh, I have a not so happy baby. Okay, and then we're just gonna brush this on. So usually just the details of the face, the eyebrows, things like that. All right, and that I think that's about it. What do you guys think?
Wow.
Did you guys like that I changed the green, or did you like it better with the yellowy green?
I like the green personally. Can we see it before and after again?
Oh, yeah.
People are saying green, yes. It's pretty universal.
Okay, so here is the after, and then here is the before.
Wow.
And after. And the before. And the after.
Everyone's saying wow and amazing.
Oh, that was a fun one. I like that one.
Yeah, wow. So, couple of questions. How did you learn to do all of this?
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I guess many different ways, I think. Um, Lots and lots of practice. Okay, so I did learn a little bit of Photoshop when I was in art school in Seattle, but back then it was like Photoshop 5 or 7 or something like this, before CS and all that fun stuff. So this is a long time ago. And then I stopped for about 6 years. So when I came back into doing photography, I actually had to reteach myself pretty much everything when it came to the digital side of things. So really just baby steps. I've watched tutorials, I've taken classes over the years, I've literally just played. I've challenged myself to get out of my comfort zone, to pick things up and just basically just try and have fun. I truly enjoy Photoshop. So I think that um, has a lot to do with it. If you can love it and you can sit here and you have the patience to play and make it happen, then I think that definitely does help. But if you don't and you just prefer just a lighter edit, there's nothing wrong with that either. This is just something that I prefer to do. But I will say that the one thing that you can truly invest in that you will never regret is furthering your education. And that's whether you're taking these classes, joining, guilds or groups like this, going to imaging, or, taking classes online, hiring mentors, that sort of a thing. It definitely helps you to grow much quicker over time. So that's the long story about it.
One of the other questions was that were there any classes particularly you recommended?
Oh, okay. Oh gosh. I mean, there's really, oh gosh. Okay, so of course I have to recommend Samarana because we really actually do have a ton of stuff, and I teach. I've been doing this with Samarana for 2 years, and every month I put out a new tutorial, if not two a month. So there's tons on there. So there's some compositing ones. There's stuff like this on there. So many different things. But there's also Chris Knight has some awesome ones. I watched him lighting, not necessarily for his editing, although he does do fantastic editing. Joel Grimes does fantastic. Aaron Nace over at Flern is fantastic. Oh, there's so many people. There really are so many people. Basically what it comes down to is finding someone that you enjoy their style and study it. What is it about their style that you like so much? Like I could say, like, so and so, I really like how they approach color in their pictures. That's something I want to achieve, and so that's something I pay attention to. I like how this one blends in their composites, and so that's something I pay attention to. And I basically just take little snippets along the way to kind of create my own style and what works for me.
Excellent. And people are asking, do you teach lighting?
Do I? No. No. I mean, I guess I could. So, and this is actually a question I get a lot because I'm an intuition photographer. I do all of this based on how I feel it looks and if it looks good in the back of the camera. I don't own a light meter. Gasp. I don't own a light meter. I just kind of wing it, and so that's something that it maybe intimidates me because I know a lot of people will come to the class and they'll be like, well, what are your settings? What's going on with the lights? What are you doing here? What is the difference in the stops of the lights, and what's the ratio and all that stuff? And I honestly, I just wing it. So I don't teach lighting at this point. Maybe down the road, once I feel like I can better, it'd be worth somebody's money to come and listen to me speak about something like that. But at this point, I would probably direct people to other photographers for lighting.
Okay, thank you. And people are asking, where can they find your tutorials, webinars, all of that stuff?
Okay, so you can either follow my page on Shannon Squires Photography, and I do a lot of stuff there in terms of announcing where I'm going to be, what I'm going to do, that sort of a thing. I have a private group that I have on Facebook, Chasing Arrows with Shannon Squires Photography. And every now and then I'll do stuff in there. I'll post things in there, tutorials. I'll go live in there and I'll do edits. But the main place you can find me and my tutorials is going to be on Summerana. And we also have a Facebook group as well. It's a pretty big group, but the majority of what you're going to find from me is going to be on Summerana.
Wonderful, thank you. And share the links with me so I can send them out to everybody.
Absolutely.
Okay, let me see if there were any other. Okay, so why don't we move on? Everyone's saying great job. This is awesome. Need to rewatch multiple times, so that's fantastic. Why don't we move on to do the drawing and share with everyone how we get to Summerana?
Okay. Oh, right. So let's do. Let me do this. So we'll pull this up. Let's do this. Can you see? Are you seeing this one right now? You're just seeing my screen still, right?
Yeah, we're still seeing the screen.
Okay. So let me do this. Let me share it.
Everyone's unmuted, so behave.
Yes. And being recorded.
Oh, it can all be edited out.
I wouldn't do that.
Okay. Okay. Are you seeing the random generator here?
Yes.
Okay. So first, let's do the Summerana. So Summerana, Summerana. So Grace, the girl who developed this, her kids are Liliana and Summer. So Summerana, if that helps you to remember, summerana.com. All right. And then this is the website that pops up. But we do also have, you're gonna see an inside look to my Facebook real quick, so don't judge me. Okay, so then we're gonna come in here to Summerana.
I think what I'm gonna do is cut that ham off. And then,
Go ahead.
I think somebody doesn't realize they're unmuted.
What are we cutting? Okay.
Sorry, keep talking.
Okay, so this is our Summerana tribe. We have, and so this is basically an interactive group where you can go on, you can ask questions, you can share different things. It is part of our page, so you're going to see a lot of promotions in terms of like what we have. So somebody's using a giraffe here. I mean, lots of edits. We have unicorns and digital backdrops, and I mean, we really have so many different things if you wanted to go on there. And this is actually a good place to kind of snoop before you decide to jump into Summerana. But of course, everybody here gets the 30 days for free anyways. So there's that. Any questions about Summerana? Oh, this blue bonnets right here, these are digital backdrops.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so if you guys are wanting blue bonnets and you live in Colorado like me where there's no spring yet.
Or Ohio where there's nothing.
There you go. Spring's already happened on the internet.
People are asking how can we get the 30-day free trial?
Okay, so I will share a link for everybody to Kath as well, and we'll make sure you guys get all of those goodies. I'll try to get on either tonight or tomorrow in the morning and make sure I send an email with all the links to all that fun stuff, and then all you have to do is message Grace or the support team, and they'll get you all set up for your 30 days.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah,
and another thing that we do have, if you don't do composites or anything like that, you don't use overlays or action, one thing we do have which is really cool, and I actually created these ones myself. They are in the membership. Are you still seeing my screen?
Yes.
The Summerana screen?
Yes.
Okay.
No, we're seeing the backgrounds.
Okay, so you can see the backgrounds.
Yeah.
Okay, so these are hand-painted digital backgrounds, and I like to use these a lot of the times in like pictures that I edited today if I wanted a little bit of extra texture or whatnot on my images. So these are a good way to add that, and we also have textures and all that fun stuff. So
did you paint these yourself?
I did. These are all digitally painted by hand. So just for fun. These are one of the crazy things I do on my downtime.
So they're available to people that sign up.
Yes. So for your 30 days, you can go in and you can download whatever you want to download, and then you'll just have it forever.
Since they're painted, are we allowed to use them for print competition?
We'd have to check on that. I know the ones from Heather the Painter you can use, but I don't know how you would go about verifying if that's okay. I mean, I don't see why not.
So you can ask Rich Newell.
Yeah, I'll ask.
Yeah.
But we want to see if it's okay with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
Anything painted is fine. Anything photographed, then it has to go into Creative Open.
Gotcha. There we go. Okay, so I guess you guys are probably wanting to know who's going to get the tablet. Okay, so I have the list of all of the names here, and they're all numbered. So we're gonna have we're gonna do a generator. You have to be present to win. So hopefully everybody's still here. Let's do this. 25 is Lana.
Oh, yay.
Oh, congratulations.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Yay!
Yay. So, Lana, make sure I've got your contact details. We'll make sure that gets sent to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're good. Do you have a tablet yet?
You know what? I have a really, really, really old Wacom that's bigger than my monitor. I can't even use because it takes up my desktop. It's way too big, and so I kind of abandoned it. So I'm super excited. I've been wanting to get a new one.
Oh, good.
Perfect.
Yeah, so it was going to go to somebody who could definitely use it.
Well, perfect, and I can. Yay!
And Shannon, thank you so much for getting the Wacom.
Yes.
Drawings from somebody.
You're welcome. I hate to show up empty-handed.
You can come back anytime.
Yeah.
I know I have to bribe people to have me back.
You can come back with or without that. Okay. Anything else you'd like to share, Shannon?
No, I don't think so. I just really appreciate you guys having me and giving me an opportunity to put on real clothes.
Thanks for sharing that.
So yeah, I do appreciate it. I really do. Thank you. It's been an honor.
Yeah, thank you so much for stepping in. It's been amazing to be able to do this for everybody. So yeah, we're going to be watching this a few times to get all of the tricks and tips together.
Good. Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's how a lot of people learn. You got to stop, push pause, give it a try, and then kind of go back and rewatch everything, and slowly you get the hang of it. And you might like what I do, but you want to use it in a different way. So I hope you guys learned lots.
Oh, I'm sure. Yes. Wonderful. Thank you.
You're very welcome.